So after StarCraft 2 Legacy of the Void comes out on November 10th, same day as Fallout. Yeah, when they announced that that it's coming out the same day as Fallout, I just kind of pictured Blizzard like unfurling a picnic blanket on the train tracks. It's like, what are you doing?
Well, here's my thing, though. Like, anything that comes out within 3 months of Fallout, I'm going to be like, am I going to have time to play this?
Sure.
Because, like, I'm really going to want to play Fallout for a long, long, long time, right?
So. I want to play Legacy of the Void, too. My question is, like, why put it out on that day?
Yeah.
Like, any day other than that, you could be, like, one of the...
Maybe try to come a little bit earlier.
Right. I mean, you'd be like, the biggest game talked about that day. On that day, you'll be second, maybe, if you can also beat out Tomb Raider.
Yeah.
But it's like, do you want your game to get attention beyond the core fan base or not? And I guess they don't really care at Blizzard because they've got a big fan base that's going to buy it. I'm going to play that game.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's going to be. I don't know if they're going to be losing sales because they're coming out on the same day. Because I do think, not that it's totally different crew, but I think the people who are really into StarCraft are going to get.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not like they're going to miss that just because Fallout's coming out that day.
But I mean, we happen to run IGN, the biggest game site on the planet. What's going to be the number one story on IGN that day? It's not going to be StarCraft.
It'll probably be Fallout Day.
Right. So and it's like if they came out a week later, it could have been StarCraft, and it could have gotten just more attention. And attention is sales. Like if people if people come and see a game, it's like, oh yeah, that game's out. That looks interesting. Or they see our review, and if our reviewer loves it and recommends it, somebody might get it that wouldn't otherwise have gotten it.
Yep.
So. Sure, but that'll still be true. That'll still be true either way, though, right? Like if someone wasn't going to get it and we recommend it, they're still gonna. I mean, that doesn't change because Fallout's there as well. The other thing about it, though, is that development cycles are extremely long and costly things, as we all know.
Well, I was going to say, we're talking about two games that are coming out on the exact same day that were super. I mean, these are companies that are known for their long development times, right? Because they make these really big, in-depth games, and especially with the case of StarCraft, it was about 10 years before we saw the sequel finally come out. Now it's been what?
I think it's 2 years.
2 years since the last release.
Yep.
And Fallout, it's been 7 years. Is that right? Something like that. Well, New Vegas was what, 5 years ago?
Yeah, I think it's 5 years
like
since
that.
New Vegas.
4 or 5. Yeah, so I mean, these are both highly anticipated, games that we don't see really regular drops for too. So that's kind of interesting.
And also both franchises from the '90s.
Yeah,
early '90s. Well, mid-'90s.
I think though we make and you touched on it before. We can. It's easy for us since we play everything and we like such a wide berth of games. Even if you're just looking at the PC, we all have many multiple genres we care about on the PC.
Sure.
I think we're maybe underestimating also the idea that. The Fallout people are just going to buy Fallout, and then the StarCraft people are just going to buy StarCraft. And there are people who play both. I'm not going to say there's no.
I do.
Yeah, sure. So do I. But then there's people who are literally they're all about that particular franchise. They've been waiting for years for it.
And
I have to say, I used to be a big RTS player. I just don't play that many RTSs anymore, though. I think it used to. Well, number one, I think I got burnt out because I played a whole lot of them, and there was a long stretch there in the early to mid 2000s where there were a lot of bad ones back to back to back.
Sure.
No, I'll still play stuff like Company of Heroes was probably the last big RTS that I really got into, really enjoyed.
1 or 2?
2. Well, 1 as well. I mean, both of them. Like, I really like that series. I like 1 a little bit better.
One's a lot better.
And I like the expansions for 1 as well. Like really played a lot of Company of Heroes. But I really used to be into. I mean, Command and Conquer and Red Alert was a series that was huge. Coming off of Dune 2 as well. Like I loved Dune 2. Right.
A fun aside: Command and Conquer Red Alert 2 is free on Origin right now.
Oh, nice.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, try it out.
Yeah.
If you haven't tried it, definitely try it out.
Great cutscenes.
I think it's just because it's I've got just a little burnout on them, and I think I've never been that much of a StarCraft player. I played a little bit of StarCraft 2. I played more of the original StarCraft back in the late 90s. But yeah, I mean, I'll probably check this one out, but I don't expect to spend as much time, for me as a personal preference. I don't plan to spend much time in that as I do in Fallout 4, which is going to just consume my world when it comes out.
It's a question of multiplayer versus single player, right? Like I'm kind of burnt out on RTS multiplayer as well. Like I was into StarCraft 2 multiplayer for a while. I was never good, but I was okay. But it's just
not as good as the North Koreans, Dan.
Not probably not. But it's it's like a very stressful thing to play.
Oh yeah,
absolutely.
Absolutely it is.
Yeah, it's kind of a young man's game. We'll put it that way. I think we aged out of that one, Tal.
Yeah,
but
got the arthritic wrists.
Yeah. But it's just you have to keep so many plates spinning at so fast.
Literally, not literally, but yes.
But
and by literally I mean figuratively.
That it's just tiring and exhausting. I kind of prefer playing the single player at this point. So it's that kind of brings me to my question, which is,
I think for me too, like the sitting of something like
let me say my question.
No, I'm not. The sitting of Command and Conquer was something that was a little bit more military based and something real world that I kind of got into a little bit more than the super sci-fi of StarCraft and the alien races. And I mean, of course, you had the Marines as well, but But what was your question, Dan?
The question is, after StarCraft II: Legacy of the Void comes out, do base building focused RTSs have a future?
I think in order for them to have a future, so there's two angles you come from this problem at. So first is from the competitive standpoint, from the competitive audience, and the thing is the big problem with base building focused RTSs like StarCraft is that you end up as a spectator experience, you have this for opening 10 minutes that can often be very dull. It's not always very dull, especially earlier in the game's life. Like early in StarCraft 2's life, when people were still coming up with and developing new openings and different kinds of openings, seeing how one person could be going with like a crazy proxy 2 racks, like no gas, kind of setup, and then the other person doesn't scout it. Will they see it? Will they not? If they don't, they're dead. If they do, then maybe they can turn it around, and it turns into an interesting long game or whatever. That whole dynamic can be interesting, but the longer a game, the deeper into the game's life it goes, the more the openings just become kind of stale and static, and it just becomes 10 minutes of the game that no one wants to watch.
I mean, that's true to some extent, except what these expansions do is completely shake that up. They change the rules. Like I believe that
for a bit, yeah.
Legacy of the Void is drastically speeding that up, as I understand it.
Well, I still think when you say, is there still a world for base building RTSs? I think there's certainly a world for StarCraft. I don't know if there's a world for other games within that genre, though.
And there's not going to be another StarCraft for how long?
Another 2 or 3 years.
Could be another 10 years.
Yeah, well, that's true.
This
is the one. Yeah, this is it. That's true.
Yeah, this one puts a cap on the StarCraft 2 story. After this, and with no Command and Conquer around anymore, and Company of Heroes, like maybe they'll do a 3. I don't know if 2 did super well for Sega.
And it can be argued that we were having this discussion before. Company of Heroes 2 has base building in it. It's not completely removed from that, but it really is more about map control and going out on the map and taking.
Right. It's not about resource collecting like the traditional StarCraft CNC.
I will say one of the RTS series that I've been into throughout the entire life cycle has been the Total War series, but it's not a base building series.
Yeah, right.
It's more of a strategic real time war.
And let's be very clear that strategy games and tactical games are alive and well. But this particular brand
with the base building,
right, the old school, CNC, Dune, StarCraft style does seem to be dying out because after StarCraft, like unless Blizzard makes another StarCraft or goes back to the Warcraft well, which I would be very surprised to see them do. Like nobody else really has the kind of star power to push an RTS, like an old school RTS.
Either the star power or the craft,
right?
Yeah, but I think also another element of it that we're not necessarily thinking about is that for so long, that element, that part of the game, even for casual players, hasn't really been interesting. It's been mostly the same thing. Do I want Unit X? Okay, I do. So then I build this structure, and then I have Unit X.
Build your resource extractors. Build your vehicle builders. Build your barracks. That kind of thing.
It's a physical manifestation of a tech tree.
Yeah,
exactly. Now, what can change that though is if companies start taking a little more creative license with the base building element and make placement more meaningful and make the way in which you build up your base more distinct. So what I'm getting at here is Petroglyph, with Grey Goo, and then with Universe at War before that. Experimented with some pretty out there interesting ideas about how you can make base building a little bit more distinct and a little bit more dynamic and interesting and fun, and I feel like that's really the direction we have to go. If that style of RTS is going to survive, it's going to require people to rethink their ideas about what makes that part of the game fun and make some new mechanics and take some risks around it.
Right, and absolutely. Like I also want to be clear that it's not like no one is making RTSs, traditional RTSs. This year alone, we saw Grey Goo, we saw Let's see, I wrote some down here. We saw Active Aggression, that just came out. We saw Ethereum, which was kind of a lower profile one.
You're playing Satellite's Reign right now? Yep.
Satellite Reign is not an RTS.
Oh, it's not? Okay.
No, that is a tactics game.
Okay.
You know, it's Syndicate, basically.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
And we saw they did an update of Planetary Annihilation called Titans, which had a single-player campaign. And we saw, of course, Homeworld Remastered Collection, if we're counting re-releases. I guess they've also released like Age of Empires 2 in HD and Age of Mythology.
You know, to me, it's kind of like what we're seeing with space combat sims now, right? People are still making them, but I don't think we're going to hit a golden age like we did with combat space sims in the 90s, 2000s. Same time era for RTSs, right? Really late 90s to mid to late 2000s. They were really popular, but now we just haven't really seen. I mean, honestly, since about the 3 or 4 years after StarCraft and No More Westwood, you know, we haven't really seen a lot of big power players in that base building RTS mode anymore. And genres shift, and then they change, right? And that's where we got things like MOBAs.
Yeah, I mean, let me tell you what's coming up that's been announced. There's Ashes of the Singularity from Stardock, which is their big like DirectX 12 showcase. It kind of looks like Total Annihilation or Supreme Commander, I should say.
Oh, cool.
And they're you know talking up all the particles they can have flying around because of the X12. I mean, it looks neat. We'll see. Offworld Trading Company is it's also being at least co-published by Stardock. That's Soren Johnson's economic RTS. He was the lead designer of Civilization 5. Oh wait, no, 4. Sorry. Yeah. I think I've got that right. It's an economics based RTS, so it's all about base building. So it's kind of gone the other direction. That one's in early access. There's Halo Wars 2.
Right.
Sure. Which is announced for PC as well as Xbox.
And the base building in Halo Wars was very like kind of modular, and I don't want to say set and like preset. It's
simplified.
Yeah, it's very simplified. Yeah.
Right. But it is. You do have to maintain a base. But
they really, I mean, it has been too more focusing on the combat than the base building in more of the recent games. I'd say like in the past, 8 years, the modern era of RTS.
We've also got Homeworld Shipbreakers, which Gearbox has officially granted the Homeworld license. It's a ground-based RTS set in the Homeworld universe. We don't know if it's going to have base building or not. We haven't really seen much of it. We also know that Chris Taylor is working on something at Wargaming. Now that Wargaming bought Gas Power and turned it into Wargaming Seattle, they're doing something.
Now you're making me think of games like Ground Control and World at War, which were such good games.
Yep.
Again, yeah, maybe I'll go back and play some of the Earth 2150. Maybe I'll go back and play some of these games now.
Ground Control and Ground Control 2 came out on Steam not too long ago.
Yeah, Ground Control was great. Yep. I love Ground Control.
That was one of the ones that really kind of pioneered the territory control. At least Ground Control 2 did. I'm not sure. I forget how Ground Control 1 did. But I think both of those were mostly tactical. Like neither of them had base building.
Yeah.
And Earth 2150 was interesting because it allowed you a very fine degree of customization of individual units, the kind that you only usually see in like a 4X game where you can custom build like templates for a ship or something.
That's another genre you don't see as much of anymore.
Sure, right.
Yep.
This was an RTS that had that, but taking that same idea, like if they could apply that to base building, I would love it if I could actually design, my own outposts, to design my own buildings to that level of detail.
And doing all that stuff in real time was always kind of a real hobbling kind of thing. But you've also got a bunch of tactical strategy games like the Total War games. We've got the Warhammer Total War or Total War Warhammer coming. We've got Total War Arena. We've got probably the next one is already in the works. And there's Battlefleet Gothic Armada, which also looks like a tactical RTS of naval combat.
When's the first-person shooter genre going to wane? I'm ready for something new to happen there. I really am.
Yeah.
It seems like that's still the bulk of everything, and that's kind of been going on for the past 15, 20 years.
Yeah, the thing with first-person shooters is that the reason why they I think endure is because from the moment you start playing, you're doing the thing that ostensibly is what that game is about. If you're playing a first-person shooter and your goal is to shoot a gun, you will probably be doing that within the first minute of playing your first-person shooter.
And VR certainly isn't going to help move away from that genre, because that's going to be the perfect kind of genre for a VR set.
I mean, I would like to see a VR RTS, because you've got like some of the demos we saw for Oculus were kind of like you put it on and you've got a table in front of you.
Exactly. I was just going to talk about AirMech. I played the AirMech VR version at E3, and that was really cool because it was basically like you had a little game table in front of you, and you were, I mean, unfortunately you didn't actually use your hands, I was using a mouse and keyboard, but it was like you were looking and you looked over here and you could see this part of the board, and you can like, it was really cool. I mean, it was like playing Star Wars chess.
It was like the first trailers for Ruse.
Exactly.
Where you were like,
exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah, and like
it was really neat.
Ruse would be a cool game to play in VR.
Oh, absolutely would. Yeah.
Yeah, and U-Gen Systems, they're the ones that made Active Aggression as well. So yeah, I mean, like what I'm saying with all this is that the genre is kind of alive, but there's no star power behind it anymore. And
so you tricked us with your question, Dan.
Well, that's my interpretation of it. Is that the genre will carry on, but I don't see there being another like super high profile thing on the level of StarCraft.
Well, again, I think that's like when you talk about the golden age, there's always going to be people who are making every genre game, right? There's still people who make point and click adventures, but it's certainly not the golden age like it was back in the early 90s and mid 90s for point and click adventures.
Well, and I'm just curious, Dan. Like you've played a lot of RTS games, and you've, for a living, you create, you critique games and dive into mechanics. Like, what kind of changes do you think you'd make to like the base building phase of one of these RTSs to make it more dynamic or make it more immediately fun and enjoyable and interesting to people? I
mean, I do kind of personally. I like the streamlining of it. I think that some games have done
like Kingdom of Heroes does.
Yeah,
for instance.
Yeah, I mean, I like pretty much all ends of that spectrum. I like Supreme Commander, how it kind of took it up a notch by adding adjacency bonuses and stuff like that.
Sure, yeah.
But I also like what Petroglyph did in Universe at War and in why can't I remember the new one? Grey Goo, where they just do different spins on it and have mobile bases. Like the actual goo itself was a mobile base.
Mm-hmm. That's kind of been some of the more modern takes on it. Is that the classic one would be like you start out from scratch every single time, right? Whereas a more modern take is maybe you have a small force or a small scenario that you have to go for, or a small base already built, and you're adding on to that, or some resources already gathered up. So they do try to get you into it a little bit quicker now. I think again back in the day. Like you would literally have nothing, and you're like, I'm this military group that has no resources and no buildings, and I just have to start from square one every single mission that I go on, right?
And the strange thing about it too that comes from that is that and you were kind of saying this before, is that these buildings end up just being like a kind of like representation or abstraction of like technological progress in a for a civilization or for an armed group. So it's kind of weird that it's like, hey, if I want more military, if I want more infantry, I need to build a building that makes humans appear. It's like, that's a little bit strange.
That's what Dan just did, by the way. He made humans appear.
I don't know if I built a building. Poof. But anyway.
Dan was playing an RTS. It was a barrack. When a man loves a woman and he builds a barrack, Dan.